2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
3 men, 1 spaceship, an event that will leave a footprint in history forever.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That was one of the most famous quotes in the world, said by Neil Armstrong. Armstrong was the first person to walk on the moon and part of the Apollo 11 space flight crew, along with Buzz Aldrin, who was second to set foot on the moon, and Michael Collins, who chose to not walk on the moon and stay in Apollo 11 because it required moon orbit and someone to control it from inside the spaceship. The idea to get people to the moon and back safely all started with John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. Although Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, was president during the time of the launch in 1969. The objective of the Apollo program was to perform a lunar landing and return to Earth safely. It was a big competition to see which country could get to the moon and back safely first. John F. Kennedy announced this idea in the midst of the Cold War, where the US and the Soviet Union were enemies.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
It was an ideological battle between, the system of capitalism and free markets and democracy and all that.
To Kennedy, this is a great way to display power and control, therefore proving to the Soviet Union that the US was more powerful, which the success of the Apollo 11 moon landing did contribute to their win in the war. Each flight of the Apollo program had a different purpose, meaning that getting to the moon wasn't the goal of the first Apollo launch. The original plan was to go step by step, starting from orbiting the Earth, getting close to the moon, orbiting the moon, landing a spaceship on the moon, and finally, landing a human on the moon. To keep it unique, each mission also had its own Apollo patch, each with a different design. But as many would agree with, the most remarkable mission would be the Apollo 11 spaceflight. It was the first mission that landed people on the moon and back safely. For many at that time, it was remarkable. It was something you wouldn't have imagined, something that seemed impossible, until the launch. I interviewed Jerome Chen-Chan, who's watched the Apollo 11 moon landing live on TV.
When I was 7 or 8 years old, one day my parents suggested that we watch the Apollo 11 moon landing on TV. It was late at night for us, and my sibling and parents all sit in front of TV. The TV is black and white, and resolution is not the best, but you could still see when the astronauts set foot on the moon and how they hop around. After we watched the moon landing, we went outside to look at the moon. At that time, I was imagining how it was possible for people to be up there when we are all the way down here. It's quite a unique experience.
The timeline of the Apollo 11 mission spanned over 8 days, 3 hours, and 18 minutes. Starting at 9:32 a.m., July 16th, 1969, where Apollo 11 took off from Cape Kennedy. After 76 hours, they entered lunar orbit on July 19th. The next day, the lunar module, Eagle, separated from the command model at 1:46 p.m. Armstrong and Aldrin manned the Eagle, which was part of the spaceship that landed on the moon. Finally, the Eagle touched down on the moon's surface at 4:17 p.m. in the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong radioed the now famous quote,
The Eagle has landed.
Ahead of their original schedule by 5 hours, Armstrong opened the Eagle's hatch. 30 minutes later, after preparing for the moonwalk, Armstrong stepped onto the moon's surface, uttering these words.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This moonwalk was limited to 2 hours and 31 minutes, and the astronauts were only allowed to walk 60 meters away from the Eagle. 19 minutes later, Aldrin joined Armstrong to plant the flag of the United States onto the moon. They also spoke with Richard Nixon through telephone radio transmission. Armstrong and Aldrin took photos of the terrain as well. They collected 21.6 kilograms of samples, used a seismometer to measure moonquakes, collected a sample of solar wind, and used a laser to measure the distance between the moon and the Earth. As they headed back to the Eagle, they left a plaque on the moon that said, "Here men from planet Earth first set foot on the moon, July 1969 AD. We come in peace for all mankind." They closed the hatch of the Eagle as they got inside at 1:11 a.m. In total, they spent 21 hours and 36 minutes on the moon's surface. 43 minutes later, they began their ascent down to the command module, where Collins was waiting for them. It took a couple hours to reach him, but they finally docked at 5:35 p.m. Apollo 11 started flying back, spending 2.5 days in lunar orbit, which they orbited the moon 31 times. At 12:50 p.m., July 24th, they crashed into the Pacific Ocean, southwest of Hawaii. Even though the scientists were pretty sure there was no life on the moon, the astronauts had to quarantine for 21 days. They quarantined in a mobile quarantine facility, the MQF, on the USS Hornet, and talked to Richard Nixon through a window of the MQF. Nixon welcomed the astronauts back to Earth by saying, "This is the greatest week in the history of the world since creation." The whole nation congratulated them, and there were many articles written about the success of the landing as well. Although the US won the space race, the Soviet Union congratulated the US on their great achievement. The Moscow radio even interrupted its scheduled program to report on the splashdown and the success of the Apollo 11 mission. They said, quote, "The courageous astronauts are again on our planet. We congratulate you on your return to Earth, courageous astronauts. Man's first flight to the moon has been completed. The glorious dream of visionaries and scientists have come true." 10,000 people met the USS Hornet when it docked into Pearl Harbor. The crew's wives were among the 6,000 people who were at the Ellington Air Force Base in Houston, where the transport plane that carried the MQF landed. All three of the crew's wives were extremely proud of them. Jan Armstrong was still in utter shock and could not believe that her husband had just gone to the moon and back, and also be the first person to ever step on the moon. Aldrin's wife, Joanne Aldrin, watched the splashdown on TV in the comfort of her home with 8 other astronauts' wives as it happened. She said she promised to give God a break now that the mission was over. Michael Collins was given a promotion on July 24th, the same day as the splashdown. General John McConnell, who was Air Force Chief of Staff, told him that the mission was, quote, "indeed a momentous achievement." Collins, who was previously a lieutenant colonel, was granted full colonel rank as, quote, "a token of appreciation for the part you played." Collins currently shares the same rank as Buzz Aldrin. The astronauts received many congrats and even had a world tour. They went to 24 different countries in 45 days. Richard Nixon announced on July 25th that they were all going to be awarded the Medal of Freedom, which is the United States' highest civilian honor. The Soviet Union never managed to land man on the moon, although they did continue with their space program. They had their first joint mission with the USA in 1975, and the USSR was also the first nation to put a space station in Earth's orbit. In 1998, the US, Russia, Japan, Europe, and Canada began to assemble the International Space Station. Without ever leaving Earth, we would never be able to understand and gain the information about the moon. The samples we brought back gave us an idea of how old the moon was, how the moon was formed, and the composition of the moon. As of now, there have been 5 more Apollo missions since Apollo 11, and 1 unplanned lunar swing-by, with the most recent one being Apollo 17, where Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt were the last people to walk on the moon in 1972. Going to the moon gave people hope that we could travel to other planets, like Mars, since we've already accomplished traveling to the moon. Apollo 11 created a turning point and a clear path for the future of space exploration and the exploration of the lunar surface. It inspired and opened up lots of opportunities for scientists, engineers, astronauts, and the future generations to come to develop and improve technology that lead astronauts to explore greater parts of space.